They fined me $5,000 for building a fence. On my own land. Let that sink in. Not a drug bust, not illegal dumping, not some scheme to scam the government. A fence. Wood, nails, sweat, and 2 weeks of honest work. Punished like I'd set fire to their front lawns. And let me tell you something, sir. If you're a man who's worked with his hands, you know what that fence meant. It wasn't just lumber. It was pride. It was freedom. It was the goddamn American dream in rail split form. But to them, to the HOA, it was a threat. To their image. To their sameness. To the tidy, plastic-wrapped illusion of control they were hell-bent on preserving. You ever dream about something since you were a kid? Something so big it lived in your bones? That was the ranch for me. When other kids were dreaming of rocket ships and NFL stadiums, I was sketching barns in the back of my school notebooks. Horses, chickens, sun over an open pasture. That was my heaven. My escape from the metal and concrete box we called home in the city. My ma used to laugh, said I was born a century too late. Maybe she was right. But if you've ever had a dream survive the long road of disappointment, you know how fierce it becomes. You cling to it like an anchor in a storm. At 35, working stock shifts in a supermarket, I finally saved enough for a small piece of land. Right at the edge of a neighborhood called Haven Ridge. Fancy name for what was really a grid of look-alike houses wrapped in regulations. The streets had no potholes, the grass was always the same height, and the mailboxes looked like they were cloned in a lab. Perfect if you liked the idea of living in a brochure. But I didn't buy in for the neighborhood, I bought for the land. Just enough acreage for chickens, a small stable, and maybe someday a little goat or two. I didn't need much, just something real, something mine. I started small. 3 hens, Henrietta, Cluck Norris, and Lady Feathers. They had personalities, these birds. Every morning they greeted me with more sass than most customers in the cereal aisle. I built their coop by hand, every plank hammered with the rhythm of hope. Then came Buttercup, my mare. Gentle as spring wind, eyes like she could see straight through you. The first time I saw her run on that field, I swear, I felt something crack open in my chest, like I'd finally arrived somewhere I was always meant to be. Neighbors didn't say much. A few smiled, some waved. Kids came to visit. They'd pet the chickens, feed them scraps, laugh in that way only children can. Felt right. Felt like community. For a little while, I thought maybe, just maybe, Haven Ridge wasn't as sterile as it looked. That illusion shattered the day I built the fence. It wasn't anything fancy. Just a split-rail wooden fence, classic ranch style. Sturdy enough to keep Buttercup from wandering and honest enough to look like what it was. Functional, beautiful, and mine. 2 weeks of digging post holes, leveling rails, cutting wood until my arms ached and the calluses split open. The kind of work that makes a man feel like a man. 3 days after I finished it, I came home from feeding the hens to find a white envelope shoved in my mailbox. Thick paper. Stiff. Official. HOA seal at the top like a branding iron. I opened it right there with hands still caked in straw dust. A fine. $500. Remove the fence. 48 hours. More fines to come. And the tone of it, God, the tone. Your fence detracts from our neighborhood's refined appearance and civilized atmosphere. That's what it said. Civilized atmosphere. As if I'd dragged a rotting deer carcass into their rose garden. I read it again and again, each word slapping me harder than the last. Civilized. Refined. Who the hell decides what refined is? Some woman in heels who never once lifted a hammer? A committee that thinks a plastic flamingo is a war crime but has no issue fining a man into poverty for wanting to build a life? Her name was Valerie Thornton. HOA chair. I found that out quick enough. She was 48, lived in a house that looked like a museum where joy went to die. I walked into her office at the community center with the letter in one hand and the deed to my land in the other. She didn't even let me speak. "Mr. Everett," she said, like she was already tired of my existence. "Your fence violates Code 17B. I told her the land was zoned for agricultural use, that the fence was legal under the original HOA bylaws, that her fine was out of line. She smiled like a predator, all teeth and no warmth. "Haven Ridge," she said, "is not a barnyard. We have standards here. This is about property values, Mr. Everett. Your farm fantasy is dragging us all down. That word hit me like a whip. Fantasy. Like my dream was some childish indulgence. Like I didn't bleed for this. Like I hadn't worked double shifts for years to make this real. I walked out of that office burning. Not with anger, at least not just anger. With resolve. You know that feeling? When the world finally shows you it doesn't give a damn. And instead of breaking, you decide, no, I will not bend. I will not crawl. Not again. That night, I pulled out the old sketchbook I had since I was 8. The one with the yellowing pages and crooked barn drawings. I flipped through them, my thumb tracing every childish line. I remembered that boy, remembered what he wanted. And I promised him something right then and there. I'm not letting them erase you. The next morning, Channel 5 rolled up. Someone tipped them off. The fence feud, they called it. Neighbors stood in front of my fence and gave interviews. Some backed me, said the animals brought charm. Others, the HOA loyalists, talked about declining standards and neighborhood reputation. Valerie must have loved that line. Reputation. As if harmony could only exist if everyone acted like clones. That night, Valerie herself marched down to my gate, flanked by 2 HOA board members. She held up her phone like it was a badge of power. 48 hours, Mr. Everett, she said, or you lose everything. But you see, she didn't understand. You can't scare a man who's already lost everything before. I've been poor. I've been laughed at. I've been told I'd never make it. This ranch? It wasn't just my dream. It was my answer to every lie the world had ever thrown at me. When she left, I did something simple. I opened a new page in that sketchbook, drew a bigger fence, then a barn, then a silo. Not because I had the money, not because I had the permits, but because dreams don't die from paper threats. They die when we stop drawing. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch with Buttercup beside me, chickens cooing softly in the coop. And I felt it, what men rarely admit out loud. Fear. Not the kind that makes you run. The kind that makes you doubt. What if she wins? What if the system is too big, too rigged? What if they take it all? But then I remembered something. A moment from high school. Tommy Morrison, the quarterback, dumped chocolate milk over my head for saying I wanted to be a farmer. Know your place, manure man, he laughed. And I walked away then. But not this time. Not again. This time, I'm not walking away. I'm building something, even if they tear it down plank by plank. Even if they fine me into dust. Because every time someone says, you don't belong here, there's a part of me that grows louder, more stubborn, more real. So go ahead, Valerie. Find me, threaten me, whisper about me behind curtain blinds. But don't forget one thing. You're dealing with a man who dreams in wood and wire. A man who knows what sweat costs. A man who doesn't run from fences, he builds them. And he dares the world to knock them down. The next morning, I didn't drink my coffee. I studied it, like it might tell me the future. The mug sat there in my hands while the sun peeked over the rooftops of Haven Ridge, painting everything in golden light. Everything except the goddamn fence. That stayed exactly the same. Still too wooden, still too real, still too uncivilized for the delicate sensibilities of Valerie Thornton and her HOA minions. But that morning something clicked. Something shifted. Not in the sky, not in the ground, inside me. Because I realized this fight wasn't about aesthetics. It wasn't about fences. It was about control. It was about who got to say what your dream should look like. And I wasn't about to let some power-hungry suburban queen dictate how a man lived on his own land. I spread every HOA document I had across the kitchen table. Contracts, welcome packets, rulebooks so thick they'd make a lawyer's mouth water. I looked for one thing, proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. That I hadn't somehow missed some clause banning wood. Because I remembered reading every damn page when I signed that agreement. I didn't just sign blindly. You don't spend 35 years clawing your way toward a dream and let paperwork bite you in the ass. I was careful. I was damn sure. What I found made my jaw tighten. Rule 17b, the one that supposedly outlawed my fence, was dated. It had a revision date 2 weeks before I began construction. But here's the thing, HOA bylaws can't just change. They have to be voted on. And according to the original agreement, any new rule required a 2/3 majority vote by all homeowners. Not just a board meeting. Not just a few uptight people sipping wine and deciding what counts as beautiful. Valerie never held a vote. She never even mentioned the revision at the last public meeting. I know because I was there. I remember her droning on about hedges and mailbox paint, but nothing about fences. Not a damn word. I pulled the original copy of the HOA agreement, the one they gave me when I signed, and laid it next to the new one. Fonts didn't match. Spacing was off. There was even a typo in the header of the new document. Real subtle forgery work from someone who thinks Times New Roman is a legal strategy. So I did what any man with a bone to pick and a printer would do. I made copies, lots of them, marked in red, highlighted, circled, annotated like I was going to war with the English language. Because that's what this was, war. A quiet, paper-stuffed, rulebook-thumping war between a man who wanted to raise chickens and a woman who wanted to raise hell. But I couldn't go in alone. Not anymore. I needed allies. So I walked 3 houses down to Diego Alvarez. Vietnam vet, mailman, and the kind of neighbor who waters his lawn shirtless like it's a religion. He took one look at my stack of documents and didn't ask questions. He just poured 2 cups of coffee and said, "Come inside." When I told him about the fence regulation being snuck in, Diego didn't flinch. "Figures," he muttered. She fined me $300 for planting a banana tree. Said it looked too tropical. Like we were running a tiki bar. He sipped his coffee, eyes hardening. My mom brought that cutting from Mexico when I was a kid. She kept it alive through 2 cross-country moves and a divorce. That tree meant something. But Valerie? She saw an eyesore. His son, Riley, came in halfway through. 17, wiry, all twitchy energy and clever fingers. Heard us talking about HOA documents and lit up like Christmas. "Found any weird metadata yet?" he asked, like we were cracking open a Cold War spy file. I asked him what he meant. He grinned, opened his laptop. People who break the rules usually leave a trail. Emails, digital breadcrumbs. Especially boomers who think delete means gone. I didn't fully understand what he was doing, but I watched him dive into archived HOA newsletters, cached websites, and a Google Drive folder labeled HOA planning that some genius had forgotten to privatize. Within an hour, Riley found gold. An email chain between Valerie and the other board members, dated a month ago, before I started the fence. One line from her jumped out. "We can push the fence rule under emergency provisions. No need for a vote. We'll cite community standards and file it with the quarterly update. Brooks won't notice." Brooks. That had to be Eleanor Brooks, the town clerk. I'd met her once at the permit office. A woman who looked like she'd been holding the whole county together with duct tape and spite since the 80s. I remembered how, during my zoning inquiries, she double-checked everything twice and still apologized for the wait. There was no way she'd knowingly let a forgery slide. Not without a fight. So the next morning, I paid her a visit. The town hall smelled like copy toner and old ambition. Eleanor sat behind her desk with half-moon glasses and an expression like she'd seen every excuse in the book and had a response ready. When I showed her the email, her grip on her pen tightened so hard I thought it might snap. "She used my name," Eleanor said, voice cold and steady. "Claimed I approved it. I never even saw that version of the rulebook." She pulled out a folder, thumbing through documents, then held up the official HOA submission log. No record of a fence regulation update, and no minutes from a community vote. That's fraud. I asked what we could do. She stared at the wall for a long second, then turned back to me. "Officially? Nothing yet. But if this goes to a meeting and you have witnesses, you've got leverage." Real leverage. That was all I needed. That week, I called for a special HOA meeting. Sent the request through the official channel. I knew Valerie would be forced to host it. I also knew she'd think I was coming to grovel. That was her style, crack the whip, wait for the kneel. But I wasn't coming to kneel. I was coming to burn her thrown down with her own matches. Thursday night, the community center was packed. Word had gotten around. About the fence, about the feud, about the farmer who was ruffling suburban feathers. Valerie stood at the podium in a red blazer so sharp it could cut glass, smiling that tight, frozen smile of a woman who thinks the crowd still loves her. She clicked her little remote, and a photo of my fence flashed on the projector screen like a mugshot. "This," she began, "is the face of chaos. One man's disregard for rules endangers our property values and our peace." The crowd murmured. Some nodded. Others didn't. I could feel the tension in the room coiling tighter. Then it was my turn. I walked up slowly, set my papers on the podium, and looked at the crowd. Neighbors, skeptics, allies, future fence builders. My voice didn't shake. "Neighbors," I said. "I built a fence. Not a brothel, not a meth lab, a fence. Because I have livestock. Because my land is zoned agricultural. Because I dreamed of this since I was a kid. But this isn't about a fence anymore. This is about power. About a board chair who faked a rule, skipped a vote, and used your money to enforce her version of perfection." I held up the printouts. "These are emails from the HOA board, showing Valerie added Rule 17B without proper procedure. These are zoning documents. And this," I waved the original rulebook. "This is what we all agreed to. Not this Frankenstein version she made to target me." Valerie interrupted, voice shrill. "These are private communications. You had no right." "But they're real," I cut in. "And they prove you forged official documents. That you lied." The room broke. People shouted. Some gasped. A few looked genuinely ashamed. And Valerie? She just stood there, blinking, as if the mask had finally cracked too wide to hold. I stepped back and watched it all unfold. Because for the first time since this started, it wasn't just my fight. Other neighbors began to speak. About their own fines, their own encounters, their silent frustrations. One by one, like dominoes toppling, the facade fell. That night, I didn't sleep much. But I felt lighter. Not because it was over, it wasn't. But because the tide had shifted. And a man who spent his life being told to shut up finally got the room to listen. Valerie thought I was the problem. But what she didn't realize is, sometimes a fence doesn't keep people out. Sometimes it holds the line until others find the courage to stand behind it. You'd think after exposing a forged regulation and standing in front of the entire HOA with proof in hand, the war would be over. That maybe, just maybe, common sense would crawl out from whatever bunker it had been hiding in and say, "All right, Marcus, you win. Build your damn fence." But see, that's not how power works. Especially not the kind of brittle, small-town power that Valerie Thornton had hoarded for years like a dragon squatting on a pile of cardboard gold. No, people like her don't lose gracefully. They double down. They twist. They dig. And they come back uglier. The next morning, I woke to a new letter taped to my front door. No envelope. No postage. Just a piece of paper and a thumbtack jammed into my wood like a warning shot. This time it wasn't a fine. It was a summons. Valerie was taking me to small claims court on behalf of the HOA for damaging neighborhood integrity and creating a hostile environment for board leadership. That last part made me laugh. Hostile? Hell, I hadn't even started yet. But what really got me wasn't the lawsuit. It was the message. "We're not done with you." I stood on my porch that morning, coffee in hand, watching Buttercup graze peacefully behind the fence I'd built with my own 2 hands, and I realized something vital. They were scared. Not of the fence. Not of the chickens. Not even of the legal case. They were scared because I didn't back down. Because I said no and didn't flinch. And that kind of resistance, no matter how quiet, rattles their little kingdoms. I knew I'd need backup. Not the polite kind. Not the neighbors who whispered "good luck" from behind screen doors. I needed people ready to raise hell in public. I needed fire. That's when Diego handed me a burner phone. "Don't ask where I got it," he said, smirking beneath his army cap. "Just use it to call Marnie." I asked who Marnie was. He chuckled. "She's what happens when the HOA picks on the wrong retired librarian." Turns out Marnie lived on the edge of the neighborhood, kept to herself mostly, ran a private Facebook group called Haven Ridge Underground. It had 67 members, all current or former residents who'd felt the long arm of Valerie's petty tyranny. Marnie was sharp, no nonsense, and cussed like a sailor. "I've been waiting for someone like you," she said when we met. "You poked the queen. Now let's watch her bleed." She got to work fast, started compiling testimonies. People who'd been fined for mismatched curtains, for bird feeders that attracted unsightly species, for leaving a tricycle on the porch overnight. One woman had been cited for excessive Halloween decor because her scarecrow offended the neighborhood aesthetic. These weren't just rules, they were control mechanisms dressed in khakis and clipboards. Marnie posted my speech from the HOA meeting to the group, paired it with a side-by-side comparison of the forged and original HOA documents. The post exploded. Comments rolled in. "About damn time. My cousin got hit with a $600 fine for wind chimes. This man's a hero. For the first time, I wasn't alone. I was the match. The wind was already blowing." Riley, the kid hacker with a conscience, started building a website. Simple, clean, but devastating. havenridgetruth.org. It laid everything out. The rule changes, the emails, the court summons, even scanned testimonies from former board members who quietly admitted to Valerie's methods but didn't want to cause drama. The site went live on a Monday. By Thursday, local news had picked it up. By Friday, it hit Reddit. And by the end of the weekend, my quiet little ranch was being followed by a $1 million HOA watchdog group out of Dallas. Valerie, she was silent, but the board wasn't. They began sending out frantic community-wide emails. "Disregard misinformation. Anonymous sources are not credible. Support your board." It reeked of desperation. Meanwhile, the chickens kept laying. Buttercup kept grazing. And I kept building not fences but trust. A neighbor 2 streets over, Mrs. Hale, invited me to speak at her church's community night. "You're not just talking about fences," she said. "You're talking about dignity." That word hit me harder than any lawsuit ever could. Because that's what it was. This whole thing, this ridiculous battle over lumber and zoning, at its core, it was about whether a man had the right to be himself in a place that pretended to be free but punished every breath that didn't fit the mold. The next escalation came from Valerie herself, though she didn't sign it directly. It was an HOA emergency motion delivered to every mailbox, proposing that all livestock, gardens, and non-conforming exterior additions be banned outright. No vote, just a policy shift under something they called Special Clause 12C. It was a nuclear option, and it meant war. So I responded, not with more papers, not with lawyers, with lights. Diego, Riley, and a dozen others helped me wrap the entire fence in neon LED strips, bright orange. At night, it looked like a dam landing strip. We called it the Neon Ranch. People came by just to see it. Some brought coffee. Others brought signs. "We are not HOA property. Chickens deserve rights. My fence, my freedom." Valerie lost it. Sent security, yes, HOA security, to shut us down. But they had no badge, no warrant, no legal ground. One of them knocked on my door and told me the lights were a violation of code. I asked him which one. He didn't know. Just said, "The board sent me." I smiled, handed him a printed copy of the real HOA agreement, and said, "Then tell the board they can send the sheriff next time." But even with all that, the court date still loomed. That's what they were banking on. Burn me out. Drown me in deadlines and paperwork until I cracked. But I had a surprise for them. Marnie had called in a favor from a nonprofit law group. They took one look at the forged bylaw and the emergency livestock ban and agreed to represent me. Pro bono. Turns out lawyers like David versus Goliath stories too. And this one, it was starting to look like biblical proportions. A week before the hearing, I got a knock on the door. Not a notice. Not a threat. A man, tall, older, deep voice, introduced himself as Calvin, said he was a retired police captain. "Valerie fined me once for having a Blue Lives Matter flag up on Memorial Day," he said. Eyes narrowed. "Told me it was politically disruptive. I paid it, but I never forgot it. Saw your story. Thought maybe it's time we reminded these people what community actually means." He handed me a folded paper. It was a petition. Over 200 signatures, residents, former residents, even town officials. All demanding a full audit of the HOA board. Not just Valerie. The whole damn operation. We were no longer a nuisance. We were a movement. So yeah, Valerie was right about one thing. This was hostile. But not in the way she thought. Not pitchforks and torches. This was a deeper kind of hostility. The kind that brews in silence and rises in chorus. The kind that says, you don't get to tell us who we are anymore. That night, I looked out across my little stretch of dirt and wood and wire and feathers. I saw lights from Diego's house flicker. Saw Riley's laptop screen glowing from his porch. Heard the faint sound of Marnie's radio playing Johnny Cash through the window. And I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. We were winning. Not because the system was fair. It wasn't. Not because justice was swift. It never is. We were winning because we stood up. Because the one thing Valerie and every HOA tyrant across America never expect is pushback. And brother, once it starts, it doesn't stop. The morning of the court hearing, I sat on the porch with a black coffee in one hand and a folder thick enough to bruise someone in the other. The chickens were clucking like they knew something was about to happen. Buttercup paced slowly behind the fence, stopping every few steps to stare at me like she was asking, "You ready for this, cowboy?" Truth was, I didn't know. I wasn't nervous about the facts, we had the truth. The problem was, truth doesn't always win. Especially not when it's pitted against reputation, money, and a committee of retirees who think authority is measured by how many emails they send before sunrise. But I had one thing Valerie didn't, a reason. Mine was rooted in soil, sweat, memory. Hers was built on fear of losing control. I'd seen it before. Same look in a foreman's eyes who knew his men were starting to talk union. Same twitch in a sergeant's jaw right before he realizes his orders are about to be questioned. Valerie thought she ran Haven Ridge. She didn't realize we were never asking permission in the first place. The courthouse was a beige building that looked like it had given up on justice around 1983. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and nervous sweat. The room was already full. Neighbors, reporters, a few folks I didn't even recognize. Some of them nodded at me when I walked in. Others just stared, waiting to see if the crazy man with chickens and lights on his fence was going to actually win. Valerie sat at the front, back straight, lips pursed like she was chewing lemons through sheer force of will. She had two lawyers. I had one, Dana, a sharp-tongued attorney from the nonprofit who wore jeans under her blazer and had a voice like gravel. She didn't smile. She didn't make small talk. She just opened her briefcase like she was unloading ammo. The judge, a tired man with a mustache that looked older than the building, gavelled us in. Valerie's side went first. Her lawyer launched into a performance so polished it could have sold car insurance. He called me disruptive, non-compliant, and deliberately antagonistic. Said my fence sparked community division, my livestock created a sanitation concern, and my website incited harassment against board members. He pulled out photos. One of a neighbor's kid holding a protest sign that said, "Let Marcus live." Another of my neon-lit fence glowing like a Vegas marquee. The crowd chuckled. The judge didn't. Valerie sat still, but her eyes flicked toward me every time her lawyer said my name, like she was daring me to blink. Then Dana stood up, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. She didn't pace. She didn't raise her voice. She just laid out the facts, brick by brick. The forged bylaw, the missing vote records, the zoning history of my property, the emails Riley uncovered. She read them aloud, including the one where Valerie said, "If we don't stop him now, we'll lose control of the image." Dana paused, then asked, "Is community about control, Your Honor? Or is it about people?" She called witnesses. Eleanor Brooks testified first. She was calm, professional, and devastating. Said she never approved the bylaw, never saw a vote request, and was deeply concerned about the misrepresentation. Diego followed. He spoke like a man who'd fought in jungles and suburbs alike. "This isn't about a fence," he said. "This is about a woman who thinks she owns the idea of order. But order without freedom isn't order. It's a prison. Then came the surprise. Dana called Valerie to the stand. Her lawyer objected. The judge allowed it. Valerie walked slowly to the seat like a queen being forced to use public transportation. Dana asked one question. Did you follow the process required by your own HOA bylaws before issuing the citation to Mr. Everett? Valerie didn't answer right away. Her nostrils flared. We followed the spirit of the process, she said finally. There was no time to hold a full vote. Dana raised an eyebrow. No time? Or no patience? Valerie shifted. Dana pressed on. Did you forge any documents? Absolutely not. Did you instruct anyone to imply approval from the town clerk? I did what was necessary for the integrity of Haven Ridge. And that was it. Those words hung in the air like a bad smell. The integrity of Haven Ridge. As if her version of order, her sterile, clipped, soulless vision, was more important than truth. The judge took the rest under advisement. Said he'd issue a decision in a few days. As we walked out, I heard someone whisper, "She's done." I wanted to believe that, but I've lived long enough to know a wounded predator is more dangerous than a healthy one. And Valerie was bleeding pride. 3 days later, I got a knock at the door. It wasn't the decision. It was worse. A manila envelope left by someone in a rush. No return address. Inside was a flash drive and a note. You need to see this. I plugged it into my laptop, half expecting a virus. What I found made my blood run cold. A hidden audio recording, taken from a board member's phone, apparently, of Valerie in a private HOA meeting. Her voice was calm, clinical. We can break him if we isolate him. Discredit the supporters. Start with the kid, the hacker. We can call the school. Say he's distributing false information. If they fear him, they'll drop him. The rest will scatter. Another voice, a board member maybe, mumbled, "That's a little extreme." Valerie laughed. Control requires sacrifice. That night, I sat in my barn with Riley and Diego. Played the recording twice. Riley didn't say a word, just stared at the wall. Diego muttered, "She went after a kid. That's a new kind of low." I knew then this wasn't about me anymore. It was about everyone she'd hurt, everyone she might still hurt. So we did the only thing left. We published the audio, uploaded it to the website, linked it to the Facebook group, emailed it to every media outlet we could think of. Within 24 hours, it was everywhere. Local news, HOA forums, even some national watchdog groups. The backlash was swift and furious. Petitions were launched. Calls for full board resignations. Sponsors pulled from HOA events. And Valerie? She vanished. The court decision came a day later. The judge ruled in my favor. Dismissed the HOA's claims as retaliatory and unsupported. Ordered the bylaw struck down. Mandated a third-party audit of HOA leadership. Kept my fence, my livestock, my land. But more than that, I got something deeper. I got proof that standing up matters. Even when it's lonely. Even when it feels like you're yelling into a storm. Sometimes the storm hears you. Weeks passed. The board was dissolved. A new election was scheduled. Valerie never showed her face again. Some said she moved to Florida. Others claimed she was sued for defamation. I didn't care. She was gone. What mattered was what came next. Because in that space where fear used to rule, something new began to grow. People started planting again. Not just flowers, real food. Tomatoes, herbs, fruit trees. Someone built a chicken coop 2 blocks over. Another neighbor put up wind chimes shaped like roosters. One kid spray-painted Neon Ranch on a skateboard ramp. I didn't ask him to. He just did it. Because it meant something. And I'll tell you what, friend. I never thought a fence could teach me so much about people. About courage. About what happens when one man says no more loud enough to shake a whole neighborhood awake. But now, every morning, when I sip my coffee and watch the sun rise behind Buttercup's silhouette, I know. That fence wasn't the problem. It was the beginning of the solution. It didn't happen with a bang. There was no parade, no confetti cannon, no final showdown where someone slammed their fist on a table and yelled, Order! The fall of Valerie Thornton and her little HOA empire came the way most tyrannies do, slowly at first, then all at once. It started with silence. That strange, loaded quiet that settles over a place when power has changed hands, but no one knows what comes next. Her house went dark. Porch lights off, curtains drawn. Her luxury sedan vanished from the driveway and never returned. I heard later she'd left town before the HOA audit even finished. Packed up, disappeared, probably to another HOA where she could rebuild her kingdom out of bylaws and Botox. I didn't waste time celebrating. I was too busy fixing the gate Buttercup had kicked open during a rainstorm. Chickens had scattered across the property that night like tiny rebels tasting freedom. And somehow that felt more symbolic than anything else. I wasn't interested in vengeance. I wanted a community where a man could fix his own damn gate without worrying someone would fine him for using the wrong kind of nails. The audit came and went like a spring flood, swept up half the old board with it. Turns out Valerie had been waiving dues for her friends, funneling funds toward personal landscaping projects, and manipulating vote counts for years. No one had bothered to check. Why would they? Most folks just wanted to mow their lawns, go to work, and be left alone. They hadn't signed up to play detective. But after all this, after the documents came out and the audio recordings hit the internet, people finally started paying attention. The next election saw more ballots cast than any in Haven Ridge history. And for once, there were real candidates. Folks with dirt under their nails, not just binders full of rules. Marnie ran and won with over 70% of the vote. Diego took the role of treasurer. Even though he kept joking he didn't know how to use Excel. Riley, after getting hounded by news reporters and 3 scholarship offers, volunteered to build a new digital archive for transparency. The kid went from hacker to hero in 2 months flat. I didn't run for anything. I'd done my part. My fight had never been about taking control. It was about taking it back. What I did do was host a community potluck on my land. First one Haven Ridge had ever seen. No permits, no forms, just a long table, folding chairs, grilled meat, homemade pies, lemonade in mason jars, and the sound of kids chasing chickens through the grass. People came in droves. Families who'd never spoken to each other before sat side by side like old friends. Someone brought a guitar. Another brought fireworks. And when the sun dipped behind the hills and the lights from the neon fence glowed soft orange against the sky, a man named Paul, whom I'd only ever seen scowling from his porch, stood up and raised a glass. He said, "We forgot we were neighbors. We let fear and rules turn us into strangers. Marcus reminded us who we are." Then he tipped his glass toward me. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. It was enough. In the months that followed, things changed. Not overnight, not in the loud way TV likes to show, but slowly, steadily. The way good things always grow, like roots under a fence post. People started talking again, helping each other with repairs, swapping seeds and recipes and stories. Lawns still got mowed, but no one cared if a dandelion or two snuck through. A kid painted a mural on the side of their garage. It wasn't HOA approved. No one asked him to take it down. It was a tree, split in half, with roots that tangled together below and a sun that rose in both directions. He called it home. It made the local paper. One day, I got a letter from a man in Oklahoma. Vietnam vet just like Diego. He'd seen the story on the internet and wanted to tell me about his own fight, how his HOA had fined him for flying the flag at night without a light on it. He wrote, "I thought I was just an old man yelling into the wind. Then I read about you, and I remembered, we don't yell because we're bitter. We yell because we remember when things meant something." That line stuck with me, because that was the truth of it all. This wasn't a battle over fences or chickens or who could paint their garage door blue. It was a battle over meaning, over who got to define it. Whether community was something we built together, or something enforced from above with penalties and passive aggression. Eventually, the neon fence came down. Not because I was forced to, but because I chose to. I replaced it with a new one. Still wood, still ranch style, but stained dark and built with help from 10 other neighbors. We made it together, laughing, cursing, sharing beers as we dug holes and lined up posts. It wasn't perfect. That was the point. It was ours. No one wrote me a citation. No one blinked. Buttercup got a new stable. The chickens multiplied. Henrietta had chicks. I named one Rebellion, another Valerie. You can guess which one's louder. And on cool nights, I sit on the porch with a blanket over my legs and a mug of strong coffee, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. Sometimes Diego joins me, sometimes Marnie. Even the judge who ruled in my favor stops by on occasion. Says he's thinking of buying land out this way. Seems freer here, he said once. I just smiled. I've learned a lot in this whole mess. About law, about leverage, about the ugly underside of neighborhoods that smile too wide. But most of all, I've learned about voice. Yours, mine, ours. The one they try to quiet with fines and forms and fear. The one they say is uncivilized when it speaks too loud. Let me tell you something, friend. If your voice rattles the walls of those in power, it means you're speaking truth. And if you ever find yourself staring down a committee of polished tyrants with clipboards, remember this. You don't need their approval to live an honest life. You just need the guts to build your fence anyway. So here we are. A fence. A horse. A few chickens. And a neighborhood no longer afraid of its own heartbeat. That's not a revolution. That's something better. That's home.